w dzisiejszej konferencji. Teraz nadchodzi czas na wysłuchanie prelekcji naszego gościa z zagranicy. Będzie to pan Charles Coulomb, który wygłosi referat pod tytułem Tradycje monarchistyczne w Stanach Zjednoczonych. So next speech is Monarchist Traditions in the United States by Charles Coulomb. So, sir, the floor is yours. Prosimy o brawa.
Thirty minutes. Could you put your hand up at 20, like that? Oh, excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight to see you all. How many of us, if I may ask the question, how many of us are good in our English? Show of hands. Excellent. That's much more than an American university would tell me. So, I want to thank you all for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here in Warsaw. I was reminded this evening very happily of the International Monarchist Congress in Warsaw in 1991, which I was very much aware of at the time and was unable to attend. This sort of makes up for it in a way, in a sense. My topic this evening is monarchist traditions in the United States. Now, I have to admit that on the face of it, this sounds like a paradox. Are not the United States of America the greatest republic that ever existed on the face of the earth? The greatest nation, of course, we know, but the greatest republic. Yes, but there is a common illusion amongst Americans and amongst non-Americans. And that illusion is that the United States popped into existence on the 4th of July, 1776. The truth is that our roots go back quite a bit further. In fact, those roots are both, dare I say it, Catholic and monarchical. Now, you'll be interested perhaps to know that the real founding father of the United States was a Habsburg, Philip II of Spain. No, he was not present in Philadelphia, for those who were wondering. No. But he was, under him, it was founded in St. Augustine, Florida, in 1567, the first permanent European settlement in the United States. And very shortly after that, New Mexico was founded, where I went to school. Santa Fe, Albuquerque, northern New Mexico. And to this day, both the area around St. Augustine, Pensacola, Florida, and the area around Santa Fe, Taos, Albuquerque, very much reflect their Spanish colonial heritage. Even in the language, the Spanish that's spoken in New Mexico is very antique, very 18th century. Shortly after, Texas would be settled, southern Arizona, and eventually, in the year of our Lord, 1769, the King of Spain, Carlos III, ordered the founding of California. And the missions, the 21 missions that St. Junipero Serra and his successors founded, were all built at royal expense. So too the Spanish missions around San Antonio, Florida, and so on. So that was the first of our three monarchical roots, you might say. The second, not quite in point of time, were the French. My ancestors, in fact. So it's something I'm very much aware of. Also the popes. Yes, he and I are cousins, 12th cousins. So is Madonna. It's inbreeding. But at any rate, the French settled the St. Lawrence River Valley, the Mississippi, and the Great Lakes. And to this day, you will find settlements in those places, especially in southern Louisiana and up around the Canadian border, that reflect old France. And our French is very antique. Now, the third and most obvious, because it came to dominate, were the English. They, of course, were already turning Protestant. But here's an interesting thing. 1607 is the first permanent English colony in America, in Virginia, Jamestown. We had always thought, by we I mean historical opinion in the United States, we had always thought that Jamestown was a completely Anglican thing. No, it was not. There were Catholics at Jamestown in 1607. How do we know? The graves. The graves. We found rosaries, relics of the saints, all sorts of other things that, trust me, a good believing Anglican in that day did not get buried with. So from the very beginning, even with the English, the faith and the crown were present in America. Now, from that time, without wanting to go into too much detail, the 13 original colonies were settled on the eastern seaboard, and with them came the entire panoply of what we Americans consider typical local government today. Counties, sheriffs, judges and juries. All of it, our system of law, comes to us from England. And you can still see bits and pieces here and there of its origins. You've heard the phrase, maybe, justice of the peace. Maybe watching American cop shows. Well, the being bound over to keep the peace, being convicted of disturbing the peace. Well, the peace they're speaking about is the king's peace. And that's a concept we brought over with common law. With a few of our states, and each state adopted its legal systems differently. So what is for one is not necessarily for all. But one of the fascinating things about it is that in those states where higher courts still have some jurisdiction over lower courts in terms of how they run their interior doings, we even now call that King's Bench jurisdiction. It's still there. All of our judges, except very few, very few jurisdictions, wear black. The reason why they wear black, unlike the British system where they've got red and purple and all sorts of other things, which in the beginning we also had. The first colonial courts mirrored the British traditional robes exactly. But in 1714, Queen Anne died, and the American courts went into mourning, and they never came out. And I remember when I was in high school, there was one judge somewhere in the Midwest who discovered this little factoid, and he started wearing a claret-colored robe because he said, you know, we all miss Queen Anne. We're sorry she's gone, but sometime we've got to move on with life, you know. At any rate, there are an awful lot of little bits and pieces like that in our local government. Our sheriffs, who is such a big part of our history, taken lock, stock, and barrel from the British system. Now, here's an interesting thing. There is, in Britain, a distinction that goes all the way down every level of government between ceremonial and practical. So you've got the king, the prime minister, the House of Lords, the House of Commons, the Lord Lieutenant and the Sheriff of the county, the Chairman of the County Council, the Lord Mayor or the Provost, the Lord Provost, the Chairman of the City or Town Council. That division between practical and ceremonial goes all the way down. But the United States were founded before that division set in. So our sheriffs are not like modern English sheriffs who are ceremonial figures. They're like medieval English sheriffs. I'm sure, who here has seen a Western film set in the Old West? Well, now some of you may remember that there'd be a fellow out there shooting them up, and the sheriff would get together a posse. The posse would go get him. Well, that posse means posse comitatus, the power of the county. And this again, directly from English law. As in the Middle Ages, so in the Old West, so today in some of our remoter counties. The sheriff, just like the sheriff of Nottingham trying to go after Robin Hood, would raise a posse and try to go get the malefactor. Well, again, our sheriffs today are much more like the English sheriffs in the Middle Ages than today's British sheriffs are. We have coroners who do just what the medieval coroners did. That is to say, inquire into people who die mysteriously. And what was a coroner? The king's man. We have grand juries, which the English have gotten rid of. We've retained all these things, but wait, there's more. We have, of course, a standing army, we have a navy and all that, but every state has a national guard. The U.S. Army traces its birthday to 1776. The U.S. Navy, I think, to 1790 or something. The National Guard traces its origins to 1636. The oldest units of our National Guard were raised under King Charles I. And you can always tell the old units because you look at their coats of arms and you'll see a lion or you'll see a cross of St. George or something. There is a unit, and again, I won't bore you with the details because it's very, very intricate, but there is a unit, an MP company, military police company in Massachusetts, whose unit badge is almost the same as the Coldstream Guards. Why? Because they were the guards of the royal governor. In Connecticut, it's going to take it a step further. There, the governor has horse guards and foot guards, and the governor of Connecticut's own foot guards are still in the red jackets and the bearskin hats and everything that their predecessors wore before the Revolution. We have a number of units like that in the militia. So, in addition to that, of course, we have hereditary societies dating back to various colonial foundings and so forth. So that monarchical past is still very much with us. But that's pre-1776. What about afterwards? Well, as you know, lots and lots and lots of foreigners came to the United States after independence from every country in Europe. Very often, the sovereigns they left behind tried to do something for them in the New World. In the case of the Habsburgs, in 1826, they collaborated in founding something called the Leopoldinen Stiftung, the Leopoldine Foundation. From then until 1914, the Habsburgs poured $25 million into the Church of the United States. And these are 19th century dollars, when every dollar had to be backed by gold. So they weren't cheapskates. They founded 400 parishes in the United States. They subsidized 300 missionaries, including St. John Neumann, who is the Archbishop of Philadelphia, Venerable Bishop Baraga, and Father de Smet, the Apostle of the Indians out in the plains. What's very funny when you read Catholic histories in the United States, and the same is true of the missions in California, you'll notice, though, they talk, this church was founded, that was done, that was done, that was done. They never mention who paid for it. Never. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because who paid for it was often a foreign monarch. And it wasn't just money. scattered around the Catholic churches in the United States, especially in the East, but not only, you will find windows, statues, vestments, etc., donated by various Catholic European monarchs. And usually you only know about it if you're a member of the parish. No, there's no national survey of these things, but there really should be. But it wasn't just Catholic monarchs. Of course, the Church of England was the established church in the southern colonies and in New York. In New England was the Congregational Church. But the successive kings and queens of England, Charles I, II, James II, William and Mary, George's first, second, third, they all contributed not just money, but chalices, especially vestments and so, well, not vestments, the Anglicans didn't use them then, but communion silver and things like that to various Anglican churches in the United States, especially on the Eastern Seaboard. And those things are very carefully prized today. So you'll go to some rural parish in South Carolina, and their most prized possession is the communion set presented by Queen Anne to the parish in 1712. And again, it's something that forms local pride, but you don't see it on a national basis. It's very, very strange that way, but true. Other anomalies. Has anyone here ever been to New York City, the city where I was born? One person. New York City. No? Oh, 2 people. 3 people. Okay, great. New York. It's, all of us who were born there think it's the greatest city in the world. I don't know if you'll get this joke, but self-delusion is the key to positive thinking. We Americans, and above all, we New Yorkers, are proof of this. So, at any rate, if you go to Wall Street, there's a big Episcopal church there called Trinity. But Trinity Church is actually owned by the king. And they have to pay rent every year. 1 peppercorn. All the way back to colonial days. And when Queen Elizabeth came in 1976, apparently they'd fallen into arrears. So they handed her a big jar full of peppercorns. Anyway, but it's not just the Anglicans either. The Dutch Reformed and the Lutheran congregations received all sorts of gifts, and universities as well, from the kings of Scandinavia until 1914 when something happened, I don't know what, from the King of Prussia and then the German Kaiser. And, believe it or not, the Tsars of Russia put a lot of money and gifts and so forth into the Russian Orthodox Church in the United States. They colonized Alaska, and then their head bishop moved from Sitka, Alaska, after we bought it in 1867. He moves to San Francisco, and finally in 1905, he moves again to New York City. But after the First War and the overthrow of the Tsar, the Orthodox Church in America collapsed into its ethnic elements. And so between the wars, the kings of Yugoslavia, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece gave a lot of money and gifts to their American congregations. To this day, the king of Thailand, the emperor of Japan, and the king of Saudi Arabia give gifts to temples of their various faiths. So that is something that again, you don't hear about unless you're part of it. You belong to some Swedish-American organization, and the patron is His Majesty the King of Sweden. And whenever the King of Sweden, or the King of Norway, or the King of Denmark, or the King of the Netherlands come to the United States, they visit all sorts of ethnic universities, towns, etc., etc. So this, again, is very widespread, but very particular and on a very ethnic level. Now, putting all of this stuff together with the colonial things I've mentioned, what we see is that there is not really an American monarchism. There are American monarchisms. there are a number of different American monarchical traditions. So where does that leave us? Well, in my experience, and mind you, I first had the guts to call myself a monarchist when I was a teenager in 1975. Fatigue, ladies and gentlemen, fatigue. I was not around in 1915 despite my appearance. Do you know what the Viennese call my hair color? Friedhofsblond. Graveyard blonde. Anyway, so in 1975, the King of Greece was subjected to a referendum that he was not allowed to participate in. And the man who engineered this was a man whose life he had saved, Konstantinos Karamanlis. That so annoyed me as a teenager. I mean, mind you, my father was French-Canadian with some Scots blood, Jacobite. He loved the House of Bourbon, he loved the Stuarts. My mother loved the Habsburgs because of her family. That allowed me to grow up without the anti-monarchical prejudice that's so much a part of American life. But eventually I came to realize that it was a better form of government, that for a number of reasons, all in all, it did better for a longer period than anything else. I also came to realize that my own United States government was actually formed by the Founding Fathers through a misapprehension of how they thought the monarchy worked in Britain. The presidency is really an elected monarchy, except that it's the pre-1688 monarchy. No king since 1688 has had the powers in the Constitution given the American president. And if that weren't enough, who elects him? Well, it's not really the people. It's the College of Electors, the Electoral College. And where did that come from? The Holy Roman Empire. Not only that, it's kind of apparent if you read the Federalist Papers, which was written to sell the Constitution, that the Supreme Court was not originally supposed to be the body of constitutional review, but the Senate, which in those days was the representatives of the state governments. It was not popularly elected. So our monarchical traditions run deep. What I will leave you with is, in my humble opinion, the types of monarchists you will find in America. There's many different kinds, but they fall into four basic categories. The first are what you could call philosophical monarchists. And these are people who study their Aquinas and their Bellarmine, and they come to the conclusion that monarchy is simply the best form of government, or their Russell Kirk, or their whomever they're studying. But that's independent of a personal loyalty to any particular monarch, any particular dynasty. The second are religious monarchists. And these are folk who come to feel, well, if they're Catholic, that the kingship of Christ is best expressed through a real king. No, not as a real king, but through a physical, visible king than through any other means. The Orthodox, Lutherans, Anglicans, etc., the same. They each find that it's most in accord with their religion. The third are emigres and their descendants who retain some loyalty to the dynasty whence they came. And then, of course, lastly but not leastly, the Anglophones. And these folk range from people who seriously feel the British form of government is best, or that, contrariwise, if it weren't for the revolution, it wouldn't have been wrecked on both sides of the water. There's an author at Harvard, Eric Nelson, who put it very well. He said that when the American Revolution and the Constitution were finished, on one side of the water you'd have a monarchy without a king, and on the other a king without a monarchy. And whether that good did either side any good is a whole other issue. But that's the more serious kind of Anglophone. And then it ranges all the way down to people who just love their coronation sets and can't wait to see the Downton Abbey release. So those are the four types. And a lot of people are mixes of all three. I'd say I'm of all four. I'd say I'm the first three. I can't really claim to be an Anglophile, but, you know. At any rate, what does all this bode for the future? I have no idea. I wrote a book called Star Spangled Crown, in which I had some fun with the notion of what an American monarchy might look like. I have no idea what the future holds, but this I do know, that unless and until not just the United States, but certainly the mother continent, return to the faith and the structure that made her great, none of our countries will do very well. And it's left to those of us who see that to try to spread these ideas and make them more palatable, more normal. I'll leave you with this thought. One of the typical American prejudices against monarchy is that we are taught from the beginning, from the childhood, to equate it with tyranny. And the phrase absolute monarchy is often used. When this comes up, I tell my fellow countrymen, really, absolute. No absolute monarch of the past had the control over us that our current masters do. Even Henry VIII had to pretend to follow the law. He couldn't redefine marriage. He couldn't redefine the nature of the human being. But we live with that and we accept it. We don't have a problem with it. Maybe we don't know what free government is. And of course, the clencher, the frosting on the cake, that's an American idiom for you, is this: COVID. That was when we saw the real relationship of modern man to the modern state. I will leave you with what I said during the time of COVID about the power structure today. What I said then, and I repeat it happily now, when they had us put our masks on, they took theirs off. And with that, I thank you.